Hello, everyone, and welcome to the EDHRECast. It's our first episode of April, and that means just by showing up, my co-host has showed up more this season than the entire Chicago White Sox. It is Dana Roach. What's going on, buddy?
George R.R. Martin and Patrick Rothfuss walk into a bar, and that's all I have. That's the end of the joke, and I'll maybe finish it in like 10, 12 years. We'll see.
Just whenever you get around to feeling like it, you know. Yeah, you got so much other stuff going on, like Elden Ring and stuff.
Yeah. Easily distracted by things other than writing books.
Well, speaking of easily distracted, why don't we get into the actual show today? Because we do have a topic. Why don't you tell us what we're talking about today on this episode?
Given the recent release of all the spoilers from Tarkir Dragonstorm, we're going to talk about what it takes to build a kind of Kindred or Typal deck.
Yeah, it's a hard process. If you're not just buying a pre-con, you want to make your own brew. Mm-hmm. Building a Typal deck can sometimes be a little hard. So we just want to take you through our steps that we go through on our end and just kind of line things out. So it just helps you with your brewing process for dragons, zombies, elves, whatever you're building. We want to help out with that. But before we get into the main topic, we have some quick shout outs to do first.
We are excited to be teamed up with Dragon Shield. Their sleeves come in all kinds of colors and art variants. Their sleeve crafter tool at dragonshield.com is an excellent addition, letting you design personalized sleeves for your Magic deck. If you were at MagicCon Chicago, you might have gotten a chance to see our personalized EDHRECast sleeves, or even get a box yourself at the EDHRECast live event, and you'll get a chance to do that again, hopefully at MagicCon Vegas coming up here soon. If you click on the link in the description below, you can get 5% off any Dragon Shield product. It makes your purchase cheaper, and it supports the show. So next time you draft sealed, protect your deck with Dragon Shield. And
if you'd like to support the show in other ways, you can do so by liking the video, subscribing on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe on your local podcast apps like we mentioned last week. We did move over RSS feeds, so you want to make sure you don't miss that coming straight to your phone, so make sure you resubscribe on your local podcast app or Spotify, whatever you use. But if you'd like to head over to patreon.com/EDHRECast, there's a way you can support the show over there too, whether you want to join our Discord community, whether you want to see all of our historic challenges stats picks that we've done over literal years doing this show. It's been a wild ride. You want to make sure you want to catch up. You can do that all over at patreon.com/EDHRECast, including get in the running for the coveted patron shout out. So this week we are going to give a very special shout out to Angela Toby. So Angela, you decided to ask yourself to be a patron or not to be a patron and went to patreon.com/EDHRECast. So thank you so much, Angela, for all of your support.
I was waiting for you to notice that Angela Toby is named after two different characters from The Office, Matt. That's what I was expecting you to go with there.
I do look like the typical Office fan, but I didn't go there. I hope I shattered your expectations in the appropriate way.
Absolutely.
And with all that out of the way, let's get into the main topic today. So Dana, you and I were talking, and yeah, Dragonstorm previews are still going on, and by the time this episode releases, they will be completely done. But building a Typal deck is super, super hard, and with Tarkir Dragonstorm being all about dragons, go figure, I imagine you're correct. A lot of people are going to be building Typal decks, especially dragon decks, here in the next coming months.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes it's kind of easy to do, but sometimes it's way harder than others. Dragons are probably the easiest deck to do this with. If you go to EDHREC and look at the stats of the most popular Typal decks in the database, dragons are the most popular type of deck people do build when they want to build around a specific creature type. There's 78,000 dragon decks in the database. The second most popular type would be elves at 65,000, then zombies at 62, vampires at 53,000, and dinosaurs in fifth at 48,000 decks. So dragons have a pretty big lead over even the type in second place, and given the amount of dragons we're getting in this set, I'm going to guess that the lead is going to expand even further.
Yeah. So what you're saying is just creature types are popular themes to build around, is what I'm gathering from you.
It's a popular theme, and among that popular theme, dragons are the most popular version of that theme.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many out there, and it's easy to see why. Dragons are kind of the top of the mountain when it comes to what is a creature type you think of in this high fantasy type of setting. So people obviously get very, very excited, but also they're powerful. They do big and dumb things that I love to do as a player. So I get really excited about this anyways.
Nobody plays Dungeons and Hydras. It's Dungeons and Dragons. It's
the that is true.
Yeah, it's the archetypal creature in fantasy for a reason.
Awesome. Yeah. And so to help people out with this episode too, we found ourselves when we build just any creature type, type of deck, we ask ourselves a few specific questions because it helps guide that whole deck building process. So we're going to ask those questions for you as the audience to kind of take you through if we were building any given dragon deck, going out there and building with something maybe from Tarkir Dragonstorm.
So the first question you kind of want to ask is like, what do you want or need from that commander? And we're using dragons as the creature type we're picking here because it's easy to use because everyone's talking about it with Dragonstorm. This will apply to whatever creature type you're going to pick. So, if you look at the most popular commanders in a dragon type deck, Ur-Dragon is the most popular, 22,000 Ur-Dragon decks. Miriam Sentinel Worm is next, 16,000, followed by Tiamat, Atarka World Renderer, and Rivax of the Claw. But Ur-Dragon is number one with a bullet, and Miriam's right behind it at 16,000. The drop-off's pretty steep after that.
Yeah, it's enormous.
Those are the decks people are building by and large. If they're building dragons, it's those two commanders.
And they kind of do a few different things, and that really kind of answer this first question of what do you want / what do you need from the commander when you're building that deck. Whereas Ur-Dragon is ramping those things out. It's making sure you're cheating a bunch of things into play. Once you get Ur-Dragon out, if you ever get to that point in the game, you're cheating so many mana costs, where Miriam Sentinel Worm is all about whenever you get that one dragon, you're going to get an extra copy. You're really maximizing the drops of every single one that's coming out. So yes, they're still dealing with dragons, but they're doing it in a different way.
And the same is true with Tiamat, with Atarka, with Rivax. Tiamat lets you search for dragons and put them into your hand. Atarka gives your dragons double strike, and Rivax of the Claw, Rivaz of the Claw makes mana to cast dragon spells, and you can cast dragons from the graveyard.
Well, and a brand new commander that we're getting in Tarkir Dragonstorm is Ureni of the Unwritten, which is that new Teamer legendary dragon. So it's 4 in Teamer for a 7/7 with Flying Trample, and whenever Ureni enters or attacks, so you're going to get value right away as long as Ureni resolves. You look at the top 8 cards of your library, you can put a dragon creature card from among them onto the battlefield, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. That right there is kind of a Miriam type of ability where Ureni enters the battlefield, you're going to search for the top 8 and just grab a dragon. It's going to be a little random for sure, but I love that randomness. Also, Rishkar's Expertise is one of my favorite cards. So I'm very excited to see if people latch onto this. I don't think it's going to be near as popular as Miriam kind of doing the work for you. And it's a sure thing with Miriam versus Ureni. There is randomness involved.
And just a note, yes, it's pronounced Miriam. I don't know why I pronounce it Miriam like it's the 5th member of the Golden Girls cast, but I do. For some reason, I mentally default to that. It is Miriam.
I think you just explained. You just explained why you got there because you just wanted to be a Golden Girl.
Well, and to answer the question, what do you want or need from the commander? If you want to get specific beyond just like it interacts with the creature types you've picked, a lot of times the specific thing that's important depends on the creature type too. So Ur-Dragon makes dragon spells cost less and it lets you play dragons for free. That's particularly relevant in dragons because dragons tend to be very expensive. So being able to do that is way more important in an Ur-Dragon deck than that same ability would be in an elf deck, where elves tend to cost, 1, 2, 3 mana. Casting them for free means a lot less. Playing them for free means a lot less. Versus like Lathril, for example, that's making elf tokens and is letting you tap a bunch of elves to deal damage. That will be way less relevant in Dragon deck because like making 1/1 dragon tokens is not really what Dragon decks want to do. You very rarely have a board that's so wide where you're going to be able to tap 10 of them. If you have 10 dragons out, you're just killing everyone because they tend to be 5/5, 6/6s, whatever. So you want your commander to have an ability that works well with that particular creature type and what that creature type does in the game as well.
Yeah, if Ureni of the Unwritten was an elf commander, I don't think anybody would care at all because entering and looking at the top 8 to maybe grab a 3-drop, that's not very exciting, but grabbing a 7-drop, the story changes very quickly there. So yeah, making sure that the abilities are helpful to just in general, what that creature type likes to be doing and how you're executing that given strategy. Super, super important question that you have to answer for yourself. So I really like this question to kind of guide from the beginning. Are you picking the commander? What creature type are you playing? And then what kind of strategy can you kind of mentally prepare to be carrying out, I should say, with that deck that you're going to be playing.
And this is really like true even if you go beyond dragons. We mentioned the other 5 most popular creature types. Elves. The most popular commander in elves is Lathril. Lathril makes elf tokens and lets you tap elves to deal damage to your opponents. Wilhelt is the most popular zombie commander. Wilhelt makes zombie tokens and lets you sacrifice zombies to draw cards. Edgar Markov is the most popular vampire commander.
Same thing.
Yeah, same thing. Edgar makes vampire tokens. Gishath, the most popular dinosaur commander, does dinosaur stuff.
Yeah, and we did a little bit of a deep dive a while back when we were talking about some of these most powerful commanders in these certain creature types. They're just so head and shoulders above what the rest of the field is doing. They're probably always going to be the most powerful thing you can be doing at the head of that given creature type. At least I hope it is, because if Lathril gets power crept out and isn't the most powerful elf commander anymore, there's probably a bigger issue at play there. But these things so powerful. But any deck that's built around a certain creature type can always be super powerful because you're able to tie in so many different synergies, and oftentimes the commander is just the easiest and best way to do that.
So should we go on to the next question here that we want to ask ourselves, and how are you going to support that theme?
Yeah, and I think the way that you kind of support the creatures in that theme is what cards are you playing that aren't that creature type? And so you have to make sure you're being very, very specific and intentional with these cards, because it's super easy to get carried away and play 30 support cards for your dragon deck, but then you forget, it's like, oh, I actually have to put dragons in this deck. And so this is a really important question that you kind of have to ask yourself, because you need to budget through the rest of your deck how much space you really do have.
Right. So if you're looking at something like Urania particularly, it's a new commander, so we use that for an example, where you have to look at the top 8 cards of your library. You have to have a certain density of dragons to most take advantage of that ability to make sure you have them in that top 8, or you have to do a lot of library manipulation, but it's probably easier just to have a bunch of dragons versus something like Tiamat, where you just search your library for dragons and put them into your hand.
Yeah.
You can get away with less really impactful dragons in that Tiamat deck since you're just tutoring them up versus the Urani deck where you have to hit them and have to have them basically spread among your deck at a density enough to get several from that top 8.
Yeah, Tiamat decks, you might need 5 or 6 dragons only because you're just going to tutor them up.
Right.
And they're going to be the biggest impact dragons for any given game. There's probably a lot of homogeneity in Tiamat decks, I would wager, because you're probably tutoring up the same 5 dragons every single game, whereas Urani doesn't have that luxury because there is that randomness factor that we talked about. So making sure, you have that density in any given deck, or even the Ur-Dragon, you still have to have those dragons to have their costs or reduced, I should say. Reducted, that's not even a word, but reduced. Taking that out there so the cost can actually be reduced and be casting throughout there, that's so important. So you always have to make sure, no matter what creature type of deck you're building, you have to have that density. And so making sure you're not overcommitting to non-creature types that you care about, that's so important because it's so easy to get carried away.
Things that support the theme, though, extend beyond just the dragons that you're putting in the stack or whatever the particular creature type is. There's a lot of support cards that work with the theme you're picking that synergize with it beyond just the actual creature specifically. And some of this is easy to find if you go to EDHREC and, dragons being the most popular creature type and Ur-Dragon being the most popular commander, you can go to the Ur-Dragon deck and in EDHREC and go to the left of the screen and click on high synergy cards and just get a list of cards that work well with dragon decks. There's just so many dragon decks. There's so many Ur-Dragon decks. Most of the includes are going to just wind up being in this list. You could just go through there and be like, oh, well, not only do I want to run a bunch of things that work well with Ur-Dragon, Crux of Fate, for example, as a board wipe works really good in this deck. It's a 5 mana sorcery in 3 double black, and you choose one, choose all dragons or choose all non-dragons, and destroy whichever one you chose. So I'm just going to pick non-dragons, obviously, in my Ur-Dragon deck and destroy all of them and keep all my dragons around. There's a lot of those things that if you just go look and see that people have done the homework for you to a degree already and found a lot of those synergistic cards, and you can just find them on EDHREC really easily. Yeah,
the high synergy cards just for any creature type are kind of probably the closest you're going to get to staple quality cards just because they're going to be so popular, so powerful in that given synergy. And if you look at just dragons in general, you get cards like Dragon Tempest, which is a super powerful payoff type of card. It's so easy to get out of hand there. But there's also a whole category of cards too. You get stuff like Dragon Speaker Shaman and Dragon Lord Servant, that those just cost reductions, being able to reduce the cost of your dragons by 2 mana. That is huge. That's so much. It's basically a soul ring on a creature.
Yeah, and the fact that it's a reducer means it can apply multiple times per turn. That's tricky to do with dragons, for example, but like if you're building an elf deck or something that reduces the cost of your elves, well, they're cheaper, and many times you're going to be casting 1 or 2 or 3 elves in a single turn, and that will stack, so like that cost reduction is going to apply to every single elf spell you cast.
Well, and you really like the medallion cycle anyways, just having a generic cost reduction for all the things of different colors. So yeah, Dragon Speaker Shaman, that's... In general, though, you cast that on 3, and on turn 4, you're casting 6 drops.
Yeah.
That gets out of hand really, really quickly, too. So Dragon Speaker Shaman's super powerful. There's a new one, Teamer Battle Crier, that's coming out in Dragonstorm as well. That's a blue, a green, and a red for a 4/3 Orc Ranger. During your turn, spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. So it does count itself. So right away, it's just reducing the cost of everything by 1. But man, if you're playing in a dragons deck where it compounds on top of each other, if you have 3 or 4 dragons out there, this is reducing future dragons by 5 mana. Like you're casting a Tarka World Render for a red and a green. That's enormous.
Yeah. I mean, there are things like the Dragon Orb cycle from Battle of Baldur's Gate.
Love those.
Yeah,
love them.
A Mana Rock cycle. There's 3 of them, and each one taps for mana. But if you use that mana to cast a dragon spell, you'll get like a temporary buff. So the red one gives your creature haste. The green one gives your creature a +1 counter and hexproof. And the green one in particular, I think, is really powerful. You get to land that dragon and have it sit for a full turn. It doesn't gain permanent hexproof, but like it's going to survive more than likely all the way around to your next upkeep at the very least before anyone can interact with it.
Yeah.
Particularly in a dragon deck where you're casting things that are almost always a huge mana investment. That is so useful, being able to feel like my dragon is going to be very difficult to remove for at least a full turn.
Well, because the worst feeling in the world is spending 6 or 7 mana on some big, powerful dragon, and then it just gets killed right away or targeted, whatever. Having that hexproof to linger around for a turn, so at least you get to untap with it. That's so important. And we talk about that all the time with high-impact creatures, with high-impact commanders. Sometimes, as long as you just get to untap with the thing, that makes a world of difference. And just, having that on a mana rock, it's so powerful. I don't think we can oversell how good of effect that is. Yeah.
And a lot of times there's really useful payoffs you find in there too, or even just like buffs. So Crucible of Fire, it's an enchantment. Dragon creatures you control get +3/+3.
Yeah.
Dragon Tempest, whenever a creature you control with flying enters, it gains haste. Well, almost every dragon has flying. And it also says whenever a dragon you control enters, it deals X damage to any target or X's number of dragons you control. I mean, you don't even need to have a ton of dragons out for that to be useful.
Nope.
2 or 3 dragons in play, and you're sniping your opponent's really good utility creatures just for free for having that enchantment out.
Yeah, absolutely. And these all just, again, they start relying on having a bunch of dragons either in your deck, in your hand, or in play. And there's just powerful cards. Draco Genesis is a new one that's coming out in Dragonstorm, and that one is just stupid how good that is. It's basically your rooftop storm for dragons, where it's 6 and red. You can cast dragon spells without paying their mana costs. So not only are you just cheating mana costs, like you're just cranking through them so quickly. And if you have cards like the Great Henge, you have anything that lets you draw cards and you cast creatures, that's going to let you just crank through your deck. But again, it all goes back to you can't have too many of these effects in the deck. Otherwise you run out of the dragons to actually be casting for free with Draco Genesis. Or I know Call of the Spirit Dragon is another big one that has an alternative win condition on the card. You still have to have the dragons out there on the battlefield, which means they have to go in the deck to begin with in order to put them on the battlefield.
Well, alt win condition, and it makes your dragons indestructible, which might be even more frustrating than the alternate win condition to play against.
Yeah, an Avacyn just for your dragons, it seems pretty good.
So should we take our little challenge to stats break here, Matt, and then we can come back and delve into things that are a little bit less obvious and like just going to our dragon page and finding good utility cards?
Yeah, we probably could. So yeah, good call. Let's break it up real quick and we'll come back and get into the rest of finding the dragons.
And Challenge to Stats is brought to you by Card Sphere, the best way to turn your unplayed cards into played cards. I just put together a Run the Last Troll typal deck, and a good bit of the cards came from Card Spear. So thanks for the person who sent me a Pygmy Troll. I appreciate it. You can send out cards you don't need for credit toward cards you want, or simply deposit credit directly into your account. And other users will send you the cards that you want straight to your mailbox. Go to cardsphere.com to check out our favorite way to build up decks.
So Dana, I'm going to start us off then with a challenge I think you're going to love. So everybody knows how good Tamiyo Safekeeping is. It's 1 green mana. Target permanent you control gets hexproof and indestructible till end of turn, and you gain 2 life. That's not my challenge. It's very good. But Tamiyo Safekeeping for a common is like fairly expensive. It's almost $3. I have a nice little alternative that does the same thing for much, much less, and one that I've been super, super high on, and that is Defend the Rider. That is 1 green for an instant that says choose one. Either target permanent you control gets hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, or create a 1/1 colorless pilot creature token with this token saddles mounts and cruise vehicles as though it power were 2 greater. So not all the time are you going to care about having the crew ability on there, but having the flexibility to either have that Tamiyo's safekeeping alternative where giving a permanent, not just a creature, but any permanent hexproof and indestructible is super, super powerful. But say you just need a blocker in a pinch or something's going wrong, you still have the ability to cash it in, make a 1/1 chump blocker, and save yourself from maybe a lethal attack. There's a lot of play there. I've absolutely been having so much fun and luck with Defend the Rider. It's just been a great alternative to Tamiyo Safekeeping. There's a ton of cards in this category too, whether you're looking at Gaia's Gift, Tyvar's Stand. It's a category that, Dana, I think you especially play a lot of in your decks because it's just such a great and efficient way to protect these big creatures, these high importance creatures in your decks. So the newest in this line, I have to tell people, play Defend the Rider. It is such a powerful card. Tamiyo Safekeeping, over 164,000 decks. This, I think, just has so much more flexibility. Unless you're playing Ivy Gleeful Spell Thief, you probably want to be playing Defend the Rider because, I mean, Ivy, yes, I get it. You're going to gain 2 life every time a copy resolves. But this has the ability to make tokens. Again, there's just so much good flexibility around this. Make sure you keep a copy of Defend the Rider in your sideboard because it's always just going to be super handy.
And my challenge today is brought to us by listener Moj, and it's for the card, the infamous Cruel Claw. Cruel Claw is from the most recent Eldraine set. It's 1 and black and red, 3 mana for a 3/3 with Menace. And it says, whenever the infamous Cruel Claw deals combat damage to a player, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. You may cast that card by discarding a card rather than paying its mana cost. And Moj writes, currently there are many Cruel Claw decks that run sorcery speed extra combat spells, such as Relentless Assault or Full Throttle. The problem is that all of them have the wording, if it's your main phase on the card. For example, Full Throttle reads, after this main phase, there are 2 additional combat phases, which means it only works if it's cast during a main phase. Since the Cruel Claw trigger takes place during combat, those extra combat steps will not have the conditions met to give you an extra combat. So those would probably be overplayed in Cruel Claw decks. However, there is one that does work, Great Train Heist, and a Great Train Heist is worded in a way that does allow you to cast it and use it during your combat step, because it says untap all creatures you control, and if it's your combat phase, there's an additional combat phase after this phase. So, some overplayed cards perhaps in Cruel Claw decks if you're planning on using them as the free spell proc. Maybe play less copies of things like Relentless Assault or Full Throttle and play more copies of the Great Train Heist. That's a good suggestion, Moj. Thanks for pointing those cards out.
All right, Dana, let's get back into the main topic then. So we've talked about a few things that maybe to a lot of players is pretty obvious. Like, look at high synergy dragon cards. You're going to find good dragons. Mm-hmm. Well, we get it. What if we're looking for some synergies that maybe aren't so obvious, though? Because that's a super important question, because you can really find some amazing hidden gems if you just learn where to look.
Sure. So for a popular creature type like dragons, you could very often go to EDHREC and just click on, the most popular commander and get 90% of the useful synergy cards just off that list. If you're digging a little bit deeper and you're playing a less popular creature type, for example, you have to a lot of times just start doing some kind of keyword searches. Scryfall is really useful for things like this. You can go to Scryfall and just do a search for, usually I make it not for creatures. That way I don't see all of the creatures that I've already probably picked from my deck, but just do a keyword search for that creature type. So like if you just go through and do a keyword search for dragons, you'll probably see all of the dragon cards that are on your dragon list, but maybe you'll see one or two that weren't listed as well.
Yeah.
So, and I find that's really useful when you're like looking for something a little bit weirder or a little bit less likely to show up on EDHREC.
Well, and Dana, I really like a strategy that you mentioned here in the show notes that I'm going to steal because I found myself doing it, but I didn't realize I was doing it when I recently built my Heir Apparent deck with Jetmir Nexus of Revels. And so you mentioned going to Scryfall and going to advanced search and just searching the generic term creature type. Mm-hmm. That's it. You don't have to put in a specific creature type, but just anything that you just want, anything that has to do with creature types in general. And you find so many amazing results just by doing that alone.
Yeah, like if you want to, for example, make your dragons unblockable, you're not going to find the card Cover of Darkness if you're doing a search for dragons.
Right.
But if you do a search for the phrase creature type, you'll hit the card Cover of Darkness, which is an old enchantment for 1 and a black. And when it comes into play, you choose a creature type, and creatures of the chosen type have fear. It's a really useful enchantment. Maybe not so much in dragons because they already have flying, but like it's a card I run in a Dimir Wizards deck I run. The wizards are trying to win via combat damage, and they don't have evasion. Giving them fear is very, very useful. And then that's the kind of card you can find if you're just kind of generically searching for the term creature type, because that's usually found in cards that let you pick the creature type, kind of make your own typal deck or make your own typal card, if you will.
Yeah, it's super helpful to find something that's just, these cards can go in any type of deck that you're building that aren't just limited to elves, not just limited to zombies. I know Tribal Force Mage was a card that I found that I really, really have been trying to find room in my Heir Apparent deck for, and it's a morph, so you can pay 3 mana, turn it down as a 2/2, but you can pay 1 and a green to turn it up and morph it, and then when it's turned face up, creatures of the type of your choice get +2/+2 and trample until end of turn. So it's just an overrun that I can pay over the course of 2 turns. That is super, super handy when I'm trying to go wide and don't have any inherent evasion built into my creatures. That's just such a powerful effect. So it's definitely something I've been looking through and I've really just had a ton of success. So I'm really glad you put this note in here, as you can find things for your creature typal deck without looking for that type specifically. And that's such a forgotten type, like search term, I feel.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that they tend to not do it as much anymore, or at least when they do it now, you kind of are aware of the card, whereas there's a lot of old cards that haven't seen reprints in a long time that do this as well.
Yep.
A lot of the ones we mentioned, Steely Resolve jumps out to me. It's 1 and a green and lets you pick the creature type and gives those creatures Shroud. Now, Shroud can be a problem in other ways, but like if your deck isn't one where you are interacting with your creatures or targeting them, giving them all Shroud, it's really powerful, especially for 2 mana.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another twist on this too that I really think is super good, is just finding things of a certain color too. Like finding things that, okay, all green creatures get X or all red creatures get that. So it's not just searching by creature type, but searching by color too is a really, really effective way to find so many powerful things.
Yeah, because I mean, even if your deck is multicolored, that doesn't mean your creatures tend to be multicolored. I have a blue-white Sphinx deck. I think only 2 of the Sphinxes in it are actually Azorius colored, including the commander. The rest are all mono blue, which means they're all blue. So like a spell that affects or doesn't affect blue creatures is going to work really well in that deck, even though it's a multicolored deck. A lot of times you'll see it in an angel deck, even if it's 2 colors. Most of the angels are mono white. So something like Ravnica at War is a sorcery board wipe. Exile all multicolored permanents. Well, that's going to miss most of your stuff, even if you happen to be playing a 2-color angel deck.
Yeah, and just to circle back to dragons, most dragons, especially dragon tokens, if that's the way that you're going, they're going to be red. They're going to be mono red, whether it's Terror of the Peaks or Lathless, I think is a really great example where you might be searching for things that only benefit dragons. But if you have a Lathless Dragon Queen deck that makes a bunch of 5/5 tokens that are red, well, this is just perfect.
Yeah, I mean, you have to think outside the box a little bit for some of this stuff, but like particularly when you get down to more obscure, maybe color pairings, maybe you're looking to play something that's not like traditional for that creature type, or you're just playing a weird creature type. then you might have to dig a little bit deeper because there's just not going to be as much obvious synergy, but there's still synergy there if you want to dig into it. Sometimes the synergy is like with shared characteristics. So maybe all of your creatures in your deck have flying. Well, then something like Gravitational Shift that gives all creatures with flying +2/+0 and creatures without flying -2/-0.
That's a huge swing.
Yeah, and maybe not as useful in dragons, even though your dragons all have flying. Like if you're playing a fairy deck, where all your fairies tend to be 1/1s and 2/2s, well, turning those 8 fairies you have that are relatively low power, buffing them all by 2 is a pretty big swing, especially when it also makes everyone else's ground creatures weaker.
Yeah, just to continue the thought on flying, Bower Passage is another great way just to mess around with flying and just finding ways to give your non-flying creatures evasion. Like there's so much going on there. It's a lot of just really, really powerful effects just by searching by keywords, by anything that just is outside the box just a little bit.
Yeah.
You're still able to find those common threads in your creatures. So your creatures all have the common thread of having that creature type, but not all your cards need to.
I mean, Mudslide is another good one. It's 2 in a red, creatures without flying.
From Ice Age.
Yeah, right, yeah. And creatures without flying don't untap unless their controller pays 2. You're playing a dragon deck, every single one of your dragons have flying. So like it's an enchantment that you can play and you can ignore it. And every one of your opponents has to pay an upkeep to untap their non-flying creatures. There's a lot of those weird kind of things if you kind of dial in on what specific thing your creature type and your type of deck is going to be doing, you can find weird things that are synergistic and feel like they are buffing whatever your particular Kindred deck is doing, despite not actually being built for that deck.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a last resort too, I feel like people just kind of forget sometimes. You can just search for changelings and find some good things. Just fill in those last few gaps in the deck to round things out. Because changelings, they're not going to show up when you search for a certain creature type, but when you search for them specifically, you find things that are almost always going to be helpful.
And things can get even like less specific the more obscure your Kindred deck gets. I built a troll deck recently because I thought it was kind of funny. There's 30 legal mono green trolls, and 5 of those are vanilla or French vanilla creatures. So like if the troll isn't named Thrun, it's probably not very good. But most of them have regenerate. And while there's not a ton I can do to build around regenerate as, a theme in that deck, something like Wilderness Reclamation or Bear Umbra that let me untap my lands lets me do all the things I want to do on my turn and still leave mana free to regenerate all of those trolls.
Sure.
So like while it's not necessarily a theme for that deck or something that supports that type, it kind of does. It lets me like find a way to utilize a common shared characteristic among that particular creature type in a way that benefits me.
Yeah, I mean, that's super deep, and I'm not surprised you built a troll deck to kind of almost literally troll us with that. Come on.
I have played 3 games with it so far, and I've managed to win all 3 somehow. So it's not as bad as it should be.
Fair. Awesome. Well, so there's finally a last question that we ask ourselves, and this is the exciting one that we've kind of focused on maybe too much, but there's a reason we put it last because, again, you have to make sure you're rounding everything out pretty well, and that is, how do I pick the creatures that I want to play that are this given creature type? How do I finally pick the dragons that are going in the dragon deck? Because unlike trolls, there's a ton of dragons that you can be picking from.
And one good thing to do is like just find the sub theme. Is there a certain thing in common with the creatures? And again, particularly with dragons, there's so many dragons. There's so many choices you can make. And to give you an example of this, I have a Selesnya dragon deck with Dromoka the Eternal as a commander, and Dromoka has bolster, so when he attacks, it puts 2+1 counters on your dragons. Okay, well then, there's reasons therefore to run, say, Hardened Scales or Doubling Season in that deck. Because the commander is going to be out a lot, I'm putting +1 counters on stuff. Why not increase the number of +1 counters on stuff? Well, if I'm already doing that, then why don't I run dragons that tend to do +1 counter stuff too? So like, I've thematically leaned into running as many of the Selesnya dragons that do +1 counter things as possible in that deck because it just makes sense with what the commander's doing, what those colors do. So there's just a strange little synergy I found there, even in something as niche as running Selesnya dragons.
And it's sometimes the colors can really dictate that sub theme too. You know, having a dragon deck in green and white is going to be very different than a dragon deck that you have, example, because I know you have one in Dimir colors too, in the blue and black. So there's sub themes that you can build in that just kind of play naturally with what the creatures like to do just because of the nature of their colors. And so, yeah, like I have a humans deck. I have my Kyler Sigardian Emissary deck, and it also has a sub theme of +1/+1 counters just because Selesnya colors do that very, very well anyways. And so sometimes the deck kind of handholds you in a certain direction with that sub theme. So your creatures just inherently like to do that given thing just because that's what every creature in that color combination does.
Yeah, and a lot of times your commander will dictate that, like you said. Lathwis Dragon Queen is mono red dragons, and whenever you cast a dragon spell, you make a 6/6 dragon token. That's going to look a lot different than, say, a Tarka World Renderer where it gives all your dragons double strike.
Yeah, absolutely.
A Tarka wants you playing big beaters that can do even more damage when you're swinging at somebody by giving them double strike. Lathwis a lot of times is running really efficient dragons that you're doing things like bouncing back to your hand to recast. So Slumbering Dragon, while not normally a very good dragon in a dragon deck, is pretty good in a Lathwis deck because a lot of times you're going to cast it, make your 6/6 dragon token, bounce it back, cast it again.
Yeah.
Do that multiple times in a turn in a way you can't do with a 7-mana dragon.
Yeah, and unfortunately too, like there's only so much wiggle room with dragons. A lot of different other creature types, they have a little bit more flexibility with like what can you do with that sub theme? Because sometimes dragons are dragons. They're going to be big 6 and 7 drop creatures. And they're going to do big 6 and 7 drop things. But when you look at different creature types out there, like zombies are really good about this. Sometimes you want to just go super, super wide and get an army of 20 zombies out there. So maybe you want like a zombie master or any type of lord effect where you're going to pump them up. You're going to be doing a lot of combat damage, or you're not really ever untapping or your zombies never lose summoning sickness because you're sacrificing them. In that case, you probably want a few extra aristocrat type of effects or anything like that. So really finding out what you want to be doing in that deck and what that sub theme is, that might help influence those creatures that you are putting in the deck, because that's just how you're going to maximize the efficiency when it comes to actually playing the games.
Well, one thing I remember us talking about on one of our earliest shows, to show you how long we've been doing this podcast, Edgar Markov had just came out, and Matt and I both had put Edgar Markov decks together really early on. And I remember us having this conversation talking about people were building Edgar, vampire decks and putting the usual suspect, big, splashy, powerful vampires in it. And I remember us both having the conversation. No, you want to put really bad 1 and 2 drop vampires, as many of them as you can in that deck, and just make the craziest, widest board you can. That's a very different, and that tends to be now when I look at Edgar decks, most of them go that route. That's a much different way to build a vampire deck once people kind of realize how Edgar plays than the initial knee-jerk thought, which is just put in the big, explosive, splashy vampires people tend to want to run.
Yeah, it used to be the only 1-drop you ran in the Edgar Markov deck was Viscera Seer because it just happens to be a vampire.
Right.
But there aren't very many other vampire decks, especially in Commander, that are playing stuff like Vampire of the Dire Moon that tends to get played. And so it is funny just how quickly that shifted though. But yeah, you are right. Back when Edgar Markov first came out and EDHREC wasn't really the thing that it was, people were still bidding on these archaic deck building sites. Edgar Markov, we had that conversation. It was like, why are people playing all these 5-mana zombie or 5-mana vampires when you could just be playing a bunch of 1 and 2 drops and just kill them by the time they cast their spells?
Right, yeah.
It's so funny to see that and just think about that conversation we had.
Yeah, and that's just such a perfect distillation of how you have to figure out maybe what how the creatures that you're going to pick for your particular deck are going to impact what your deck is doing based on that commander.
Absolutely. There's so many different ways that you can take, and it just all comes back to what are you trying to do? What is the commander helping you do? And then maybe what are the colors enabling too? So there's so many different levers that you can use just to lean into making sure you're not having the exact same deck. Because I know, Dana, you hate it when you have the exact same deck, or even
Yeah.
half of the same deck as somebody else.
Sure.
And so there's so many ways you can just lean into that freedom to be creative.
Yeah. And you know, maybe that's not important to you. It doesn't have to be. If you just like want to play the, you know, prototypical Ur-Dragon deck and that's fun for you, that should be fun for you. Like there's nothing wrong with that. But one of the things that's cool about Commander is it's like the one Magic format where if you want to dig deep and like build something as a creative expression and still play the deck in a way that like can win games, you can do that in Commander. So like that's one of the things that's nice about this. There's just so many different ways to find that path to build that cool, different, unique deck if that's what you want to do and have it also work.
Yeah, Dana, absolutely. It's fun just getting to see all the creative things people can come up with. Hopefully people get to be creative with dragons. You know, there's so many different options that are going to be coming out. So anybody who likes to build Dragon Kindred decks, now's your chance. There's so much refreshment around it with this whole set dedicated to that. So I'm really curious to see what people are going to come up with.
I am too. There's just so many tools coming out in the set. I mean, even, you know, my Selesnya deck and my Dimir Dragons deck, I'm finally going to be able to pull out, you know, Young Blue Dragon and Illusory Dragon. And I was running some pretty bad creatures and I'm getting enough tools that I'm no longer having to run that kind of stuff to have enough bodies in those decks. So that's going to feel pretty good.
So some real bottom of the barrel options there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, with that, let's get out of here. We'll cut it short. But if anybody wants to get a hold of you and ask questions about your Dragons decks, Dana, where can people do that?
You can find me online at Blue Sky most of the time, at Dana Roach. I write articles for EDHREC, and we are all able to be found at patreon.com/EDHRECast.
And then you can find me on pretty much any social media platform at Mathimus55. That's MATHIMUS55. And don't forget, we are proud to work with Dragon Shield to provide just some of the best accessories to protect all of your cards. You can't protect your life total from dragons, but you can protect your dragon cards with Dragon Shield. So make sure you check them out as well. And if you'd like to get a hold of Joe, you can do so. Find him on social media at Joseph M. Schultz. And with that, I think we don't really have anything else to say other than make sure to EDHREC your deck before you wreck your deck.